We often speak of dogs through the habit of ownership. We name them, schedule their lives, assign them a place in the house, and we say they belong to us. But if you pause for a moment, that language begins to feel slightly off, because anyone who has truly lived with a dog knows that whatever is taking place there does not sit comfortably inside the idea of ownership. It is something closer to a relationship than a possession. Those who have encountered what they might call a soul dog know this immediately. There is a bond that resists explanation, just steady, unmistakably real. In a world where human beings so easily hurt one another, where trust is bargained, loyalty offered only when it is safe, and affection given out in careful portion, there exists a creature that seems to move by an entirely different rhythm. A dog does not calculate. It does not compare. It does not stand back to see whether love will be returned in equal measure. Its presence is not strategic. It is simply present. And this leaves us with an unsettling thought. If such a way of being exists so close to us, walking at our side, resting at our feet, sharing our ordinary days, then perhaps the deeper question is not why we keep them, but why we were given them at all. Why out of the vast movement of life it would choose to walk so closely beside us. To understand what it means to have a dog in your life, we may first have to let go of the idea that a dog is a pet. The term itself performs a subtle reduction. It classifies, organizes, and implies ownership, something to be managed, trained, perhaps optimized. Yet this framework fails to account for what is actually taking place. A dog is not merely an object within one's life, but a mode of existence, a different way of being placed beside your own. And this contrast matters because human beings tend to inhabit a divided condition. We are rarely fully present where we are. We exist partly in memory, replaying what has already happened, and partly in anticipation, imagining what might come next. Most of the time we are not here at all. A dog, on the other hand, appears to live almost entirely in what is happening. There is no visible concern with who it used to be, no evident anxiety about who it must become, no personal narrative being quietly maintained in the background. So when you sit next to a dog, something rather unusual occurs. Two modes of consciousness meet. There you are thinking, commenting, explaining things to yourself. And there the dog is simply responding to what's happening. The dog isn't asking, "Am I enough?" It isn't wondering where this relationship is going. And when it looks at you, it isn't measuring you against who you used to be or who you think you should become. It meets what is there. And that's why the connection feels so immediate, because the dog isn't relating to your identity, your past, or your ambitions. It's relating to your presence. So in that sense, you don't really own a dog. You do not truly own such a creature. You are for a time entrusted with a being that already knows how to exist. When you look closely, humans have a very curious relationship with love. Music, we almost never let it stay simple. We think about it, we manage it, we turn it into something that needs to be secured without quite noticing. We begin to add conditions. I'll stay if you stay. I'll love you if you change. I'll give you loyalty if you reassure me. And before long, love becomes a kind of quiet agreement, not spoken aloud but carefully in the mind. A subtle contract we're always renegotiating. Now, there's nothing especially wrong with this. It's understandable. Human beings live with memory, with anticipation, with fear of being hurt again. So we learn to protect ourselves the only way we know how. But then, right beside us appears a creature that doesn't seem to be playing this game at all. A dog doesn't arrive with expectations about who you should become. It doesn't seem concerned with your reputation, your past mistakes, or your plans for the future. It doesn't love you because of something. It simply loves, not as a virtue, not as a moral achievement, but as its natural way of being in the world. And this is what theologians have always pointed toward when they speak of grace. Love without prerequisite. Love that does not need to be earned, justified, or explained. A dog lives in this state effortlessly, which may be why dogs make poor theologians. They don't need belief systems. They don't require doctrines. They are already embodying the thing religion struggles to describe. So perhaps God did not place dogs beside human beings to teach obedience or responsibility, but to set beside us a living reminder of what love looks like before conditions ever enter the picture. Not an idea, not a rule, but a presence. In this sense, the dog becomes a kind of spiritual anchor. Seen from a deeper angle, dogs prevent human beings from floating too far away into the world of their own ideas. We are remarkably good at living inside concepts, inside explanations, conclusions, and stories about ourselves, while forgetting the simple fact of being here. Now, many spiritual traditions speak of awakening in very modest language, not as a flash of light, but as presence, as a willingness to stop arguing with what is already taking place, as a gentle trust in this moment, exactly as it appears. And this, of course, is where the dog has always been. A dog does not rehearse grievances. It does not construct a memory palace of wounds. It returns almost immediately, even after pain, not because it is unaware, but because it does not live by calculation. The dog does not punish absence. It does not withdraw affection as a lesson. It does not interpret vulnerability as failure. This is often mistaken for foolishness, but it is not ignorance. It is not naive. It is a certain clarity of heart, a way of meeting life without armor and without delay. Human beings often notice this and say half-jokingly, dogs are better than people. But the deeper truth is more unsettling than that. Dogs are not better than humans. They are what humans look like when fear has not yet learned how to take control of the heart. And this is why losing a dog hurts as deeply as it does. The grief often feels out of proportion, almost embarrassing in its intensity. But that's only because the bond itself was never built out of words. You didn't love your dog through ideas, you loved through rhythm, through routine, through presence, through the sound of familiar footsteps, through touch, through shared silence that didn't need to explain itself. So when a dog leaves, you don't lose a story. You don't lose a role or a narrative. You lose a way of being. It is as if innocence itself has slipped away, leaving behind the absence of something that once required no explanation to feel safe. This is why people often say, he knew me better than anyone. And what they mean is not that the dog understood their opinions or their history or the character they present to the world. A dog never knew your persona. It knew your tone, your breath, the subtle shifts in your body when you are anxious or at ease. A dog knows when you are unsafe with yourself, and it stays. So the grief is not only for the animal that is gone, but for the self that once knew how to settle without defense or justification in the simple presence of another living being. That is what is being mourned. Not companionship alone, but unconditional safety experienced without words. Eventually you notice something that doesn't quite sit right. Why does a creature like this pass through life so quickly? Why does life allow something so transparent to remain only for a while? But perhaps this is not an accident. Dogs do not break our hearts by mistake. They break them by design. If love never ended, we would treat it casually. We would confuse it with ownership. We would assume it belonged to us. But because it ends, love is revealed as something else entirely. Not a possession, but a participation. Not something we keep, but something we enter for a time. A dog's brief life quietly teaches what no philosophy lecture ever quite manages to say. That presence matters more than duration. That depth is not measured in years. That grief is not a failure of love, but its price. We often imagine grief as the opposite of love, but in truth, grief is love that has nowhere to go. In this sense, dogs are not meant to stay forever. They are temporary teachers, not permanent companions. They arrive. They give themselves completely. They complete the lesson, and then they leave, returning us to the question we would rather avoid. Can we love fully knowing in advance that it will end? A dog answers that question not with words, but by living it briefly, beautifully, and without regret. There is another way of looking at this whole business, and it isn't a particularly comfortable one. You see, a dog doesn't really belong to you, even though the language insists that it does. My dog, we say, as though life itself were something that could be owned. But if you watch carefully, the relationship doesn't behave like ownership at all. It behaves more like a temporary arrangement. For a short while, two lives run alongside one another. They share mornings, habits, silences, and in that time, something subtle happens. The dog has a curious effect on you, not because it tries to improve you, but because it doesn't. It draws you out of abstraction and back into immediacy. It interrupts your seriousness. It softens the edges that living tends to harden. And then, just as you begin to assume this will go on indefinitely, it stops. And we call this a tragedy. But from another point of view, it was never meant to be otherwise. The arrangement was always temporary. The mistake is thinking the purpose was permanence. It wasn't. Humans often imagine they are rescuing dogs, saving them, giving them a better life. But one could just as easily say that dogs appeared at precisely the moments when humans are in danger of becoming a little too calculating, a little too mechanical, a little too certain. And when that danger has passed, the dog goes on its way quite naturally. And perhaps what matters most isn't the dog at all, but what its presence keeps pointing toward. When your dog looks at you, tail moving, eyes open, completely unguarded, there is no calculation there, no request, no plan. It is not asking, will you protect me or will you stay? It is asking something far more difficult than that. Can you live like this too? Can you arrive without armor? Can you stay without guarantees? Can you love without trying to control what happens next? If you can, even briefly, then the dog has already done what it came to do. Because it was never here to be fixed or trained into perfection. It was here to remind. If God could speak through a dog, it would not argue. It would not explain itself. It would not ask you to believe anything. It would say, stop thinking, sit here. I'm with you and this is enough.